Hey, what's up, guys? Quincy Carrier here, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here in video format. A ton of questions after the Browns' big Week 3 victory over the Bears. So I'm just kind of ready to jump into it. And we're going to start with a question from Christian, who says, I noticed the black undershirt underneath Baker's pads this past Sunday, which could have been padding to protect his shoulder subluxation. Do you believe that might have been a reason why he was more inaccurate Sunday, or was this more of a product of Chicago's defensive line getting pressure? Fun fact, I think Baker was actually really good versus the blitz, if you believe what Pro Football Focus has charted. He was pretty good versus the blitz. Now, I don't think this has anything to do with Baker's shoulder. It wasn't his throwing shoulder that got popped out. It was his other shoulder. And not saying that doesn't have an effect on how you throw the football, but it's not going to have a huge effect on how he throws the football, especially 1 week after it. Now, I don't think his shoulder had anything to do with it. Just every once in a while, quarterback's going to have a little bit of an off day where they're just not as accurate, right? It's like a shooter in basketball or a golfer, right? You know, not every day they're going to be hitting eagle or shooting 40%. Some days they struggle a little bit from the field. That's just kind of what it was for Baker, right? He just wasn't as accurate as we're used to him being, just because he was having a little bit of an off day, I think. That's really, I think, as deep as that explanation needs to get for him, just because, you know, we know he's accurate. We know how pin drop accurate he can be. And when he's not, it's usually just because he's having a little bit of an off day. Next question comes from SPAS, who says, how good does it feel to have been right about J.O.K? I admit I thought he was too small. He's ranked 5th of all linebackers in the NFL. Take your bow. Tell us how it feels. There's really nothing for me to take my bow about when it comes to J.O.K. I believed what I saw on film. I believed what other people who I trust saw on film. And, you know, it made me get to this conclusion where I thought J.O.K. was the best linebacker in that draft. And I thought it was a pretty obvious if you watched him at Notre Dame. Like, this wasn't a deep cut for me. This wasn't me digging deep into the prospect book and finding some dude out of Northwestern Michigan or something like that, and that dude becoming a superstar. Like, this isn't that. This is J.O.K. He was at Notre Dame. Everybody knew he was good, and then everybody talked themselves out of it. For whatever reason, heart condition, size, whatever it is, they talked themselves out of it. And that's not rare, unfortunately, for a lot of teams, right? A lot of teams will talk themselves out of a good player. A lot of teams will talk themselves out of making the right decision. There is a great quote: football is a pretty simple game made complicated by very unintelligent men. Like, that is the quote that defines a lot of what goes on in football. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes when you see it, it is what it is, and you don't have to try to add all of these variables and factors like, oh, what's its size? Is that going to translate? It's not that complicated sometimes. Sometimes if a guy is really good at playing football, no matter what level he's at, he's going to be really good at playing football. And that's what I saw with J.O.K. I saw a dude who was extremely good at football, and I felt like those skills would easily translate because he's just a very, very, very good football player. Next question comes from Safe to Say Football, who says, who was a unsung hero on offense, defense, and special teams, if you have one, that you've taken notice to, but the media and the rest of the fan base haven't necessarily? Well, the Browns fan base, I'll give Browns fans this. They're not the type of fan base to let somebody go by unappreciated. Like, Browns fans generally appreciate literally anybody who makes any type of contribution. Like, you know, that's not a problem that this fan base or even this media group around the Browns really has, right? I mean, anybody who does anything positive, like, we have seen this team be so pathetic for so long that anybody who does anything good, they're gonna get their flowers, right? You know, that's why we have so many different hives of fans within Browns fandom that they sometimes beef with each other. It's weird. But special teams wise, I think Demetric Felton, he's going to be a really, 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 really good punt returner if he returns punts like he has the last couple of weeks, right? He is dynamic. Like, I think it's a game or two of doing that before teams just stop punting to them. And now you're getting this offense with the advantages that they have, right? They're really good at running the ball. They're really good passing the ball. They're really loaded all across the board offensively. If you get that offense with the benefit of teams being scared to try to punt to the punt returner, or the punt returner getting that offense into good field position, don't let this defense continue to be good, right? Because then I don't know what teams are going to do there. But yeah, I think Demetric Felton might be the most underrated or understated, but most important spoke to this will. Chase McLaughlin, he's going to get some credit here. I want to see a little bit more out of him. Had an excellent game last week. Don't get me wrong here. I just know with kickers, they could go on a hot streak for like a couple of weeks and then get cold, and then that's the last you have ever heard of them. So for Chase, I just would love to see this continue on throughout the year so that, you know, we can have some actual confidence in the kicker, right? That's all I want. Just have consistency at the position. I just really want to know what he's good at and what he's not good at, and have a base on that before I go all in on him. The next question comes from the NZ Takeover, who says, how much can we value the defensive display? We were dominant, but the Bears' offense is historically bad. Nagy was almost purposeful in setting up Fields to fail at times. Okay. Don't let the media narratives jump you to the point to where you're not even going to give the Browns any credit for what they did. Because, yeah, was Nagy a little bit neglectful? Sure. Like, he definitely could have left more people in protection versus Myles Garrett. Is the Bears' defense not good? No, they're not good, but they're not historically bad. Like, they didn't look this bad last week against Cincinnati. They won that game. They didn't look that bad against the Rams. So, you know, it's not like that they're this historically bad offense. Apparently, they got a star wide receiver named Allen Robinson. I didn't really see him much last week, but apparently they do. And, you know, they're not that bad of a team to where anything you do against them gets discounted. Now, it does have to be taken in context, and I think that context will be next week, right? I think next week we're really going to see if the secondary is tightened up, because that's a real test next week. Whatever you think of Kirk Cousins, I don't care. I think Kirk Cousins is a pretty good NFL quarterback. He's not elite. He's not one of the best 5 guys. He's not an MVP candidate. But if you have a weak defense, if you have a schematic hole in your defense, if you have fundamental structural problems in your defense, Kirk Cousins is going to weed them out and take advantage of them. So that's going to be a real test to see if some of these issues on defense still exist, or if they've tightened some of these things up. They have great receivers. They have a good running back who may or may not play, but I think that's going to be a real test. This was a nice appetizer. This was a nice kind of showing of what they can do when they're put in position to succeed, whether it be by Joe Woods or be by Matt Nagy. It's a little bit of both in that situation. But also, you know, yeah, you're going to have to wait and see with this defense, right? Because this one game isn't going to prove anything if they go out against the Vikings and kind of lay a turd. The next question comes from Noah Jones, who says, should us Browns fans be upset that the Chiefs lost to the Chargers? The Browns could have made them 0-3. Sure, right? Like there is that point to where you're upset that you could have easily won that game, but you did not win that game because you made way too many mistakes in that game and handed it to the Kansas City Chiefs, who have demonstrated that they are a little bit more beatable of a team than we kind of assumed coming into the season. But you've already lost the game. You can't go back and win that game. So now if Kansas City loses, that's a pretty big deal for the Browns. That's good for the Browns, right? You know, I think that's where you should be at. If you're trying to fight for playoff seeding with Kansas City, you want them to lose as many games as possible and for the Browns to win as many games as possible to make that game that you lost matter less or be less consequential when it comes to where you can stand when it comes to the playoffs, if you can get home field advantage or not. So, no, if the Chiefs take more L's, you should not be upset. You should be happy because it helps you. It would be like if you lost to the Ravens week 1 and then the Ravens lost a bunch of games. No, you would be happy that the Ravens are losing a bunch of games after that, because then, you know, it makes it easier to gain ground on them. The next question comes from Eddie, who says, why are the Browns seeming to be more of a second half team? Because they're good. And when good teams are good, they tend to play better in the second half than they do in the first half. I think some of the second halfness is that, they played Chicago, they played the Texans. With all due respect to those two teams, those aren't teams that the Browns look at on film and feel like can beat them if they come out and just play their game, right? So you're not going to necessarily see them come out with the biggest sense of urgency versus those teams. But when they did play a team like Kansas City, they did start out good. So I think that's really has more to do with it. Next question comes from Chance, who says, how are you feeling about the defense moving forward? I think we'll keep up the great performances or fall back to our old ways. Love the content. Keep grinding. It's going to be a little bit of both, guys. I don't think every week's going to be 5 sacks by Myles Garrett. I don't think every week's going to be the Houston game. I think it's going to be a little bit in between. I think for at least the next 8 weeks, we're in for a pretty inconsistently up and down shifting kind of ride here, right? I think some weeks are going to look excellent. Some weeks they're going to look bad. Some weeks they're going to be okay. Some weeks you're going to want Joe Woods fired. I just think that's the ride we're on until about week 11, and hopefully by then things stabilize out. But I do think that, it's going to be a little inconsistent from here on out. Next question comes from Billy Odell, who says, could you see J.O.K. winning Defensive Rookie of the Year if he continues to play like he did against the Bears? Absolutely. If he gets more snaps, he needs more snaps. But if he can get more snaps, I do think he can make a play for Defensive Rookie of the Year, especially because there's no great pass rusher in this year's draft class, and nobody's really on a tear right now. So you're not contending with somebody like a Chase Young who's going to get like 10, 12 sacks. So, yeah, it's wide open there for him. There is a big opportunity for him to win Rookie of the Year this year. The next question comes from Mike Lay, who says, did Joe Woods change his approach with our defense, or is the Bears offense just bad? I'm trying to determine if our defense is finally clicking or if success was due to deficiencies on the Bears offense. It's a little bit of both. The Bears offensive line being terrible definitely helped the Browns. Matt Nagy not leaving tight ends or running backs into chip definitely helped the Browns. Don't get me wrong there. But I do think Joe Woods deserves some credit because I don't think he changed up the scheme, but he took the safety off. I'm going to use a very nerdy analogy here. If you have ever built a computer, you would know what I'm talking about. But when you build a computer and you first install the CPU and everything, and you get it up and running, the CPU is not unlocked. It is locked to a certain speed it is locked to a certain speed until you unlock it, right? And that is to kind of keep the temperature from not getting too hot. Basically, it is to protect the CPU from itself so that something drastic doesn't happen, like the computer blowing up because the chip got too hot. But if you know what you're doing and confident that you know what you're doing, you can do something called unlock your CPU, which can make it faster, more capable, but it's going to run a little hotter and be a little bit more risky long term. I think Joe Woods finally allowed his players to be a little bit more unlocked. That, to me, was the biggest difference. It wasn't really a scheme thing. They've moved Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney around a ton in the first 2 weeks, so that wasn't anything new. But it was allowing these guys to just be a little bit more locked, play a little bit more free, and not have to think about the different rules of the defense as much. And it allowed these guys to make decisions, right? J.O.K's sack, where he got in on that sack with Myles Garrett, is a key example where he had the freedom to freelance on that play and attack that gap and seal that sack. So I think that's really what it was about, was him just trusting his players a little bit more, and trusting that he has good enough players to make taking the training wheels off worthwhile. Next question comes from Matt Sanchez, who says, with J.O.K. having a good performance against the Bears, do you think we could see him start more games to come? Absolutely. He needs to start. He needs full snaps. J.O.K. is the real deal. Get him on the field more. The more he's on the field, the more plays that are getting made, the more plays that other people are making. Put J.O.K. on the field. Let's rush that process. If he makes a mistake, I'm willing to live with it because I'm pretty sure he's going to make a play to make up for it. The next question comes from Fly on the Wall 412, who says, any thoughts as to why the O-line felt a bit overmatched? Chicago obviously was a good D-line themselves, but I didn't expect us to get pummeled. that much and give up 5 sacks. Now, that's a real concern, right? Jedrick Wills wasn't playing great before he got hurt. Then he got hurt. Blake Hance was in there. Joe Bitonio didn't have a great game in my eyes. And I think a lot of that kind of came into it. Yes, the Bears are a good defensive front, but they also shouldn't give up 5 sacks. But also, I want to consider that I think the game plan, especially in the first half, was for Baker to attack deep. And that required Baker to hold the ball longer. And I think maybe the offensive line and the offensive coordinators and the offensive staff kind of underestimated how well that pass rush was working, because I think they went in with a game plan thinking that, hey, we can hold these guys for 3.5 while Baker goes downfield. We didn't have 3.5 last week. So that might have had something to do with the sack numbers. And sometimes it's Baker just holding on to the ball too long. So those things kind of add up on each other. We'll see as everybody gets healthy, as some of this chemistry comes back, how things are looking later on in the year. I'm not panicking yet, but yeah, it was a little bit of a concern, especially because they haven't been lights out the first 2 weeks either. But that's it for this week's questions. Again, guys, thank you so much for asking. Have a great day and have a great night.